One of the biggest mistakes home buyers make isn't buying the wrong house. It's actually buying a house without fully understanding what they're getting into. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying to never buy these homes that are going to be on this list. In fact, a lot of these homes are fantastic. What I am saying is that I would be careful when buying these types of homes. And I'm going to explain why. And we're going to have some really Salem-specific reasons why these types of homes are going to be on this list in the video. And one of the homes on the list might surprise you because it's actually a type of property that many buyers actively seek out when moving to Salem, Oregon. And by the end of the video, I'm going to explain why some of the homes I'd be most careful with are also some of the homes I'd still consider buying myself. When people are moving to Salem, Oregon, they're looking for a lot of that Pacific Northwest charm. And that leads us to our first house on this list, and that is the historic home. And we've got quite a few of them here in Salem, especially in and around the downtown area. Just north of downtown and just south of downtown is where you're going to find most of these homes. Now, they're attractive because they are charming. They're really cool. Some old architecture like bungalows, Victorians, craftsman style homes, beautiful neighborhoods, and it's really attractive to buyers moving to Salem. But here's where I'd be careful in buying these homes. While they're really cool, they are really old, and old homes tend to have a lot more problems. Not that they're structurally built wrong, it's just that the systems and the components can potentially be really old, like 100 years old. And sometimes with these older homes, the maintenance or repair of these can be more because as you're repairing one issue, a lot of times you're uncovering some issues that you may not even found, again, because of the sheer age of the house. The main things we're looking for in Salem in these beautiful historic districts are the plumbing, the electrical, foundation, and roof. Now, of course, you can say that about any home, but specifically for these older homes, knob and tube wiring is not unheard of. It's a very old style type of electrical that is prone to fires, and not only is it dangerous, it's not that efficient, and insurance companies have a big problem with it if it's discovered. Plumbing is another thing you want to be careful on in these historic homes. Now, a lot of these have been updated. However, the drainage system, the sewer lines, those are the things that go a little unseen, that don't get really much paid attention to, and they're made of really old materials. And again, they've been sitting there for 100 years, slowly deteriorating from a lot of use and some natural deterioration. So you want to be specifically aware of the sewer system on these older homes. Now, when it comes to roofs on these older homes, it's a little bit more obvious, and most of these roofs have been changed out over the years, but something, again, you want to be aware of. And a lot of these older homes, they don't have good insulation or any insulation at all. So these are things you also want to be aware of because that's going to affect your heating bill and your electric bill and your gas bill. And so these all play a factor when buying these old homes in Salem, Oregon. Another system that you want to be aware of is the HVAC system. I've seen some dinosaurs in these old homes, and they could be very costly to replace, because you're not necessarily just having to replace the HVAC system itself, but all the ductwork too, because there's a good chance these ductworks have asbestos in it, and they've also deteriorated over time, and that could be circulating through the house. So if you are considering buying one of these really cool, charming, old historic homes in Salem, because again, that's a lot of people gravitate towards these homes when moving here, you're going to want to make sure your inspections are done thoroughly. Hiring the right inspector makes all the difference, and making sure that you are comfortable with some of the repairs or replacements of these systems that come with an older home. Seller may not do all of them for you, and you may come across a lot of hidden issues after you buy the home, and that would be very unfortunate if you're not financially prepared for that. So when buying these older homes, it's always nice to have a little bit of some sort of savings specifically for house repairs when buying this type of home in Salem. And while historic homes tend to get a lot of attention because of their character and charm, the next issue is something that can affect almost any home and can become expensive quickly if you don't catch it early. The next home on the list of homes that I'd be careful of purchasing are homes that have roofs that are near the end of its life. Now, you could say, of course, this pertains to any house in any location, and that is true. However, we are going to go over some Salem-specific things that affect the roof here that you need to be aware of. So when you're buying a home with an older roof, you have to be aware of it. The roof could still be functioning just fine. No evidence of leaks, which would be the first thing we'd be looking for. And sellers aren't necessarily going to replace the roof just because it's on the older side. So it's something that you need to be prepared for in the event that something does happen a year or 2 or 5 after you purchase the home. Now, an inspection hopefully would reveal any signs of active leaks, especially if you're buying in the fall and winter. I love doing home inspections during rain because it really reveals some of the issues that could be happening in a home. And this is where it does get revealed quickly. When you have a roof leak, you'll find it during rain. But if it's not raining, it's a little bit trickier. You look for other signs like staining or wood rot or any type of deterioration in the insulation upstairs. And of course, on the top, the asphalt is peeling or tearing apart. Those are things that you want to be prepared for. Now, in Salem specifically, there are two things that you want to be aware of. And the first thing is moss buildup. We get a lot of moss on the roofs, especially on the northern facing roofs when you're in the when you're in Salem. Not in other parts of Oregon, it's a little bit different. But when you're in Salem, when your north exposed roof tends to get moss because the sun is hitting you mainly on the south side, southern exposure. So you get a lot of shade, and the moisture tends to stay on the roof longer to grow this mold. I didn't mean mold, I meant moss. So when you see the moss growing on your roof, you want to take care of it immediately, whether you get it scraped off or treated with some sort of fungicide. The thing is, you don't want to let it grow wild, because what's going to happen is it spreads quickly and it's going to peel up the layers of your roof, exposing it to more moisture and water damage. And then you're going to have much bigger issues throughout the whole roof rather than just that section. So it's something that happens very often. This happens in neighborhoods with a lot of old growth trees. People love the trees here. It's beautiful. However, they do create a ton of shade and then eventually moss on your roof. Now, of course, if you see a home that you really like and it has moss on the roof, it's not a game changer. It's not a deal breaker. It's not a home that you shouldn't go after. It's something that we want to be aware of. You can use it for negotiations. Ask the seller to treat it, have it removed, and or if the roof is damaged in that area, you have it repaired. And so inspections are very important, but again, it's not a deal breaker by any means. And I'm not going to say don't buy a house because it has moss on it, because a lot of homes have moss on it. However, it's just something that you need to be aware of. Now, something happening here in Salem, which is becoming very trendy, is adding solar panels to your roof. I personally don't get it. I may get a lot of comments on here from solar enthusiasts. Doesn't make sense to me to have solar in Salem, Oregon. I've sat down with several solar companies. Financially, it makes zero sense to me. I'm paying more for the panels and still paying for some electricity, because my electricity would not be fully covered, because we don't get enough sun throughout the year. There's too much cloud cover, too much rain, that we're not really taking in enough energy or solar to power the home throughout the entire year. Anyway, that's a whole nother story that we can get into on another video, or we can get into it in the comments. But the real point is, in this section, is solar panels are applied to your roof, and they're applied through nails and screws, which jeopardizes the integrity of the roof itself. So if you don't have the right solar panel / roofing company helping you put those panels in, they could be damaging your roof, letting water come into your attic space. Now, the other big issue is, if you put solar panels on an aging roof, that's a disaster, because when you have to replace that roof, you got to take the solar panels off. That's a complicated task which requires specialty, and that specialty costs more money. And again, more damage can be done. So if you have to replace the roof, you got to remove the panels, and you got to put the panels back on. It adds a lot more cost to it. So again, if you're buying a home that has solar panels, you want to be extra sure that the roof has not been damaged during that installation, and certainly not buy a house. Be very careful buying a house that has an older roof with newer panels on it. The good news is that roof issues are usually fairly easy to identify during the inspection process, especially during the fall and winter. The next thing on my list is much harder for buyers to evaluate, especially if they don't know what questions to ask. I do these videos because I love providing information to potential home buyers that are thinking about relocating to Salem, Oregon, because I was once in your shoes. I'm not a local to Salem. I moved here a handful of years ago, so I understand a lot of concerns and questions that you may have, and there's just not a lot of information specifically about Salem on YouTube. As a reminder, I'm Dave Fine, a local real estate agent. I love helping people move and relocate to Salem and helping them with their home purchase. Hit me up. Contact information popping up. I'd love to hear from you and help guide you with your home purchase here. Now, the next home on the list I'd be careful in buying are homes with an aging HVAC system. It's vitally important when you live in Salem to have a great HVAC system, heating and cooling, because it makes a difference in your comfort when you're living in the Pacific Northwest and in Salem. Now, these systems should be evident when they're old. You can really tell just by looking at them, but also sometimes you have dates on them, and a home inspector would help identify the age of it as well by looking up the serial number. The challenge with HVAC systems when buying a home is if it's working, a lot of times it's hard to get the seller to give you some sort of credit, because how do you argue to replace a working furnace, working HVAC system, a working AC condenser, other than the thing is old and it may crap out at any time in the next couple of years? So if you can't really negotiate a brand new furnace on a furnace that's working but old, there are certain things that you want to ask the home seller. If they have any records of service, because that's going to be important to show you the type of maintenance that's been going on. You want to take a look at the filter to see that it's not filthy, because if someone's taking care and replacing the filter, at least they're taking care of the system. You also want to have a home inspector make sure they're using some sort of heat gauge by pointing it at the registers in the house to see how efficient that system is working. Is it pumping out enough heat and enough cooling when the system is on? Now, this sometimes can be tricky, because if you're buying in the fall and winter in Salem, sometimes you can't put the AC on. The challenging part when you're in Salem, if you're buying a house during the fall or winter and the outside temperature is below 60 to 65 degrees, there's a good chance the home inspector is not going to want to turn that AC on, because you can actually damage your condenser and freeze over the coils. So sometimes you can't get the AC tested during a home inspection. So then you're relying on the seller disclosing any issues, and you're relying on any records that you hope the seller is keeping regarding the maintenance of the system itself. And a lot of people who are relocating to Salem think, well, we're in the Pacific Northwest here, it doesn't get all that hot. That's not necessarily the case either. We do get some pretty warm summers in late spring and summer. The temperatures can 80s, 90s. They're even talking triple digits once in a while. It's not crazy. It's not going to be triple digits. I don't want to scare you off in that manner, but you're certainly going to be using the AC late spring and throughout the summer. So you want to make sure that that system is functioning, because it can get quite uncomfortable. We are in a valley. We're situated between the Cascade Mountains and the coastal range. And so sometimes the air and the heat can get trapped here. So it is important that you have a functioning AC system when living in Salem, Oregon. An HVAC system may be out of sight, but certainly should not be out of mind. But even an aging HVAC system isn't usually what creates the biggest surprise cost for homeowners. Some of the most expensive issues I see actually start outside the home. Now, this next home issue on the list is something that I come across quite often when helping clients buy their homes here in Salem, Oregon, and that is the drainage issues that we can potentially have here in Salem, Oregon. If you've seen my other videos or just do some general research, you know it rains a lot here in Salem, Oregon. There's no covering that. And with that comes some potential drainage issues, water pooling, which then can affect and damage your home. Now, if you do come across a home that you fall in love with, it's not a deal breaker. None of these are deal breakers on this list. It's just things that you need to be aware of and see what the solution is in fixing the problem. The first things we want to look for are the gutter systems on a roof. And hopefully there's a gutter system on the roof in Salem, Oregon. And you want to see where that water is draining out to. Now, ideally, it has French drains, which means they're going down into the ground. There's a pipe that's running under the ground out into the sidewalk where that water is really being funneled away from the home. If the home isn't equipped with that, you at least want the gutter to be extended out several feet, if not more, away from the home. So when the water is draining out of that gutter system, it's not just falling right back towards the home, which then now leads to the grading around a home. Now, this is a little bit more challenging to identify, especially during spring and summer when it's not raining. But you want to see that the grading is not going towards the house. And if it is, you want to make sure that there is some sort of proper drainage or some sort of gravel blockade or something that's keeping the water from actually going towards the foundation of the home and just kind of more so seeping into the ground. Now, if you do happen to be buying a home during the fall, winter, or spring, early spring when it's raining, that's ideal again because you can see where you have some problem areas. You can see where you have pooling of water in and around or around the home and where you need to identify that issue needs to be addressed, whether it's through regrading around the home or adding some sort of drainage system to the yard itself. Now, the pooling water isn't necessarily the bad part. The bad part is when it starts affecting the foundation of the home. Because if you have too much water by the foundation, it's going to cause too much movement, more exposure of that foundation, and then you have much larger issues to deal with. The other thing that can lead to is mold, and specifically in homes that have some sort of basement living or subground living space area, because that's where you're going to have the dampness that's going to creep in, whether through issues with the foundation or some sort of ventilation, or maybe you have some windows there that aren't really tightly sealed. Either way, mold can start creeping up into your home if the drainage issues around the home are not dealt with. And even if the house that you're thinking about purchasing doesn't have a basement level or basement type of living, you do have a crawl space. Most homes have crawl spaces here in Salem. You want to look for any type of drainage issues or dampness that are happening or occurring in the homes there, because again, if you have water underneath the house anywhere, it's going to cause mold issues and mold growth, whether it's onto the foundation or onto the framing of the home. Anything that's underneath the house that's going to be wet can cause a much bigger problem going down the line in the house. It is not uncommon for you to see sump pumps in homes, especially if they have any type of under subground or basement style living, or in areas that are in hillsides where you can't help but the grading is going towards the home, and in the crawl space you have these sump pumps. They are put in there so when it detects water, it automatically pumps that water out and away from the house. And again, it isn't a deal breaker. When you see a sump pump in a house, it doesn't mean you shouldn't buy the home. Again, it just comes down to awareness, also making sure that sump pump is functional, seeing what the age of that sump pump is, maybe even asking the seller how often that gets triggered and turned on. These are all things that you can look for during an inspection and ask the home seller. And again, they're not uncommon to find when you're living in Salem, Oregon, especially in the hillside areas. And once you start talking about water, it naturally leads us to another factor that every buyer should understand before making an offer in Salem, Oregon. Now, the next type of home I'd be really careful about buying are homes in a flood zone. Again, this doesn't mean you shouldn't buy them, but we need to be aware of what it all means to buy a house that's designated in that zone. Now, you may be thinking the Willamette River, which cuts across through Salem, is the biggest problem or culprit of causing the floods, and that's not really necessarily the case. In fact, there's not a lot of homes built around the banks of the Willamette River. It's actually the creeks that are flowing into the Willamette River. Especially we've got Pringle Creek and Mill Creek, and there's a handful of other creeks that could potentially flood over in different parts of Salem. Now, there are several issues that come up with buying a home in a flood zone. The one we'll start off is the most obvious. If the creek overflows and your home is in that path of the water, you have a lot of water damage, and water damage can be very costly to repair. You're calling in companies like ServPro or any other type of water mitigation company to come in and get the water out of your house. Then you've got to deal with all the damage the water did to the house itself. And if you don't do that, you've got a longer term issue, which would be mold growth if you don't deal with the damage, the water issues right away and get that cleared out and dried out. Now, the next issues are a little bit less obvious, but certainly should have some impact on your decision making when buying a house in a flood zone. You want to determine what the insurance implications are going to be, because whether you're getting financing or not, it would be good to have flood insurance. Now, if you are getting financing, they are going to force the issue about getting flood insurance. And home lenders will certainly not allow the loan to go through without getting the insurance coverage, the flood insurance coverage in place. And some lenders may not even allow the loan at all, depending on the severity of the flood zone or the type of financial institution. Now, going back to the insurance, this could add quite a bit to your monthly or annual bill, depending on how you're looking at things. But you can expect anywhere between maybe $1,000 a year all the way up to like $8,000 a year. Now, you can break that down to monthly payments, but $1,000 a year to $8,000 a year extra in the cost of your homeowner's flood insurance policy. Now, that number will decrease the further out you get from the creek. So if you are the home that's right next to the creek, that's going to be really expensive. If you're a few houses down and the street level is kind of going up and not really going down. Now, if you're a few houses down from the creek, the premium could go down a little bit more, but the further away you are. Now, you could be still within a flood zone if you are a couple blocks away from the creek. You really got to check the FEMA flood map popping up right now, and certainly when you pull up records, we can determine whether that home is in a flood zone. Is it in a 100-year flood zone, a 500-year flood zone? There's different types of grading of the flood zones, and that will also determine the cost of your insurance as well. Now, the city has installed some overflow mechanisms for these creeks, so when the water does rise, it helps mitigate that and moves the water somewhere else, maybe away from the streets where the homes are. But it's not a guarantee. It does play a big role, and it is a factor, and it does help, but you can't guarantee your street won't get flooded. Now, the next issue is the resale value. Now, right now you're focused on buying a house, but at some point you may end up selling it. And this could be a factor when selling the home. There are going to be less buyers that are willing to take on a home that are in a flood zone. And so that could ultimately affect the price that you get for your house, or it could also affect the time, how long that home takes to sell. Now, you may be asking, why would anybody buy a house in a flood zone? And there actually is a cool factor to buying a house along a creek. When you have a creek kind of running behind your home or next to your home or in the area, there's something very peaceful and tranquil about it. You hear the flow of the water. A lot of times there's these really cool walking paths along the creek. So basically you're stepping outside your home and you've got this really cool nature path. So there's a lot of really cool factors about living next to a creek. It's peaceful and all of that. And there really is this kind of Pacific Northwest vibe when living by a creek. However, you just need to be aware of some of the extra costs, some of the potential issues and hazards. Again, not saying not to buy one of these homes. If it's really appealing to you, I certainly understand why it would be. Just be prepared financially and also with the understanding that at some point it could flood over and affect and damage parts of your home. Now, flood zones get a lot of attention, but they're not actually the issues that make most buyers nervous. The next category is usually the one that raises the most concern, and for good reason. This next home to be careful of when buying a home in Salem, Oregon, are homes that have foundation issues. Now, these foundation issues could be caused by a number of the other issues that we addressed in this video. Whether it's poor drainage, or it's an old historic home that the foundation's been there forever and really wasn't built originally to the standards that we have today. Or maybe you live in a flood zone where there tends to be a little bit earth movement. So a lot of factors could play a role in foundation problems in Salem, Oregon. But the bottom line is, they're generally easy to find during a home inspection. And depending on the age of the home, it could be common to see some cracking in the foundation. Now, the question is whether it's cosmetic or not. Now, a general home inspector can give you an idea of whether they think a specialist should come in, and if they think the cracks are large enough, or depending on how the cracks are forming. If you have a crack that's forming in a Y shape, that's problematic, or one that's really jagged and connecting to a lot of sections and joints in the foundation, that could be problematic. Now, these issues can be solved, sometimes with just some filler and some brackets, and you're good to go. But sometimes the issues can be much larger. Now, a lot of times there are indicators that you may having some foundation issues or some shifting going on in the house, and that could be windows that are stuck, they just don't crank open, or doors that don't shut all the way, or if you shut the door, not close it like all the way, but if you slightly close it and the door then opens up on its own, that could be a sign of some foundation or some settling issues that would need some further investigation underneath the home in the crawl space, or if you have some sort of basement dwelling, it can be discovered there as well. The reason why this issue is on the list of homes I'd be careful of is because the foundations can be really expensive to repair and hopefully not really replace, but make the fixes necessary to make the house supported the way it needs to be supported. Because, of course, without a proper foundation, the integrity of the rest of the home can be compromised. And the reason why it's on this list for Salem home specifically is because the foundation is affected by some of the other factors that we had talked about and things that are hard to avoid, like the weather. Again, because we have so much rain here, it is vital that that foundation gets inspected from that general home inspector and even possibly having a specialist come out. And another thing to note is that during inspections, if you see any evidence of repair on the foundation, certainly ask the seller for any information, whether it's records or knowledge. That way you have an understanding of what had happened, what they had to fix, maybe even the causes of why that happened. So you become much more informed when buying a house, even if there are repairs that have already been made. At the end of the day, some of the best homes in Salem fall into one of these categories. And the idea isn't to avoid these homes altogether. The goal is to understand the risk and to be prepared and ask the right questions during that home purchase process. because that's how you avoid some expensive surprises after you buy the house. Now again, I do these videos because I want to help you, guide you, give you as much information before you move to Salem, Oregon and buy the home. I went through the same process that you went through. There wasn't a lot of information on YouTube or in general really about Salem, Oregon. And so if you are thinking about buying a house, moving to Salem, Oregon, definitely reach out to the contact information popping up above. I love helping people relocate to this awesome city and answer any questions that you may have.